The Blackwood auction house smelled like cowardice, not the clean fear of battle. That scent I understood, even respected. No, this was something fouler. Sour sweat seeping through silk finery, the metallic tang of old blood trapped in stone cracks that no amount of lye could scrub clean. And beneath it all, the cloying sweetness of rot, the kind that sets into a pack when its leaders have forgotten what it means to lead. I stood in the shadows at the back of the hall, letting the darkness swallow my frame. The other alphas hadn't noticed me yet. They were too busy preening, adjusting their ceremonial cloaks, comparing the weight of their coin purses with sidelong glances. Peacocks, every one of them. Fat on territory they'd inherited rather than earned. Soft from decades of treaties signed in rooms like this one. The auction block stood at the center of the chamber, raised on a platform of black marble veined with silver, a mockery of the old ways. Our ancestors had used such platforms for coronations, for the binding of sacred oaths. Now the Blackwood pack used it to sell their own blood. 12 women had crossed that block tonight. 12 daughters of lesser houses offered up like breeding stock to settle debts their fathers had accumulated. I'd watched each transaction with the same cold detachment I brought to battlefield assessments. Calculating, measuring, waiting. Then they brought her out. The girl moved like something half dead, her bare feet barely lifting from the stone as 2 handlers dragged her forward. Silver shackles bound her wrists, real silver, the kind that burned shifter flesh. I could see the welts from here, angry red lines that disappeared beneath sleeves too thin for the mountain cold. "Lot 13, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying that particular blend of boredom and contempt that marked him as a man who'd sold too many souls to remember they'd ever mattered. "Elara of the Blackwood line, Omega class, 23 years. Documented lineage to the first blood right, though..." He paused, allowing himself a small, cruel smile. Our scholars have found no evidence of viable power manifestation. A ripple of disinterest moved through the crowd. I heard one alpha mutter something about defective stock to his companion. Another laughed. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at her eyes. She kept her head down, hair falling in matted curtains around her face. The posture of defeat, of surrender. Every other woman tonight had worn the same broken stance. But when the auctioneer grabbed her chin and forced her face toward the torchlight, that's when I saw it. A flicker in her left iris. Gold, bright as molten metal, there and gone in the space of a heartbeat. The Golden Sigil. I'd seen that mark only once before, in a manuscript so old its pages had crumbled at my touch. The mark of the Vault Keepers. The bloodline that had sealed away the truth of the shifter origin 10,000 years ago, then scattered to the winds to ensure no single alpha could ever claim it. And here she stood, chained and bleeding, being sold by her own brothers for what amounted to pocket change. "We'll start the bidding at 5 gold, the auctioneer said. "Do I hear 5? 3, someone called out. Laughter followed. "I'll give you 2 and a breeding contract," another voice added. 100. My voice didn't rise above its normal register. I didn't need it to. The words cut through the hall like a blade through silk, and every head turned toward the shadows where I stood. I stepped forward, letting the torchlight catch the iron circlet on my brow. The symbol of the Iron Coast. The mark of a territory that had never bent knee to Blackwood treaties, never signed their poisoned accords, never participated in their political theater. Until now. 100 gold bars, I repeated, moving through the crowd that parted before me like water around a stone. Delivered to your vaults by dawn. Unless, of course, someone wishes to counter. The silence that followed was exquisite. I watched the auctioneer's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a kind of sickly greed. 100 gold bars were more than the Blackwood Pack's entire treasury. It was more than most alphas earned in a lifetime. It was, quite deliberately, an amount so obscene that refusing it would be financial suicide, and accepting it would be an admission that the great Blackwood Pack had been bought by Iron Coast money. "You overstep, Iron Alpha," the voice came from my left. Korath of the Stone Valley, his face flushed with wine and wounded pride. "This is a Blackwood matter. Your territory has no claim here. My gold has every claim it needs." I didn't look at him. My eyes remained fixed on the girl, on Elara, who had finally lifted her head. Those dark eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker behind the exhaustion. Not hope, something sharper. Warning. "Unless you'd like to outbid me?" Korath's hand moved toward his sword. Several of his men did the same. I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I'd been told it looked like a wolf sizing up wounded prey, deciding which limb to take first. The description was accurate enough. "Please," I said softly, "give me a reason." The moment stretched. I could feel my own men positioning themselves near the exits, 12 of my best, disguised as merchants and servants, now letting their hands drift toward concealed weapons. If this turned bloody, we'd paint these walls red before the Blackwood guards could draw their ceremonial blades. Korath's hand fell away from his sword. "Sold," the auctioneer croaked, his voice cracking on the word. "To the Iron Alpha, for 100 gold." I crossed to the platform in 4 strides, and took the chain from the handler's trembling hands. Up close, she smelled like copper and crushed violets, blood, and something else, something that made the wolf in my chest pace with an agitation I hadn't felt in years. "Walk with me," I said, low enough that only she could hear. "Don't look back. Don't speak until we're clear of this place." She didn't respond, didn't nod, simply fell into step beside me as I turned toward the exit, the crowd parting once more, their silence thick with fury they didn't dare voice. We were 3 steps from the door when her voice reached me, barely a whisper, rough from disuse. "You shouldn't have done that." I didn't slow my stride, didn't acknowledge the words, but something cold settled in my chest. Because the girl who'd been documented as mute for 7 years had just spoken her first words, and they sounded like a prophecy. The Iron Coast earned its name from the cliffs, 300 feet of sheer black rock rising from a sea that never stopped trying to tear it down. The stone was so dense with ore that compasses spun uselessly within 10 miles of the shore, and the old sailors' maps simply marked the region with 2 words. Here, death. I'd chosen to build my fortress here precisely because of that reputation. Let the other alphas have their fertile valleys and their trading routes. I wanted a territory that would break anyone foolish enough to attack it, and reward anyone stubborn enough to call it home. We'd been riding for 6 hours, and Elara hadn't spoken again. She sat before me on the saddle, her body rigid with a tension that hadn't eased since we'd left the auction house. I could feel her pulse racing through the thin fabric of her dress, too fast, too shallow. The heartbeat of a rabbit caught in a trap. "You're not going to die tonight," I said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. "Whatever you've been told about me, whatever nightmares the Blackwood elders filled your head with, they were exaggerations, mostly." No response. Her spine remained a rod of iron against my chest. "I didn't buy you to hurt you." The words felt strange on my tongue, too soft for the man I'd trained myself to be. "I bought you because you're the only living soul who can open the vault of the first king, and before you ask how I know that, I've spent 30 years searching for someone with the Golden Sigil. Your brothers had no idea what they were selling. A small, bitter sound escaped her, almost a laugh. "They knew exactly what they were selling," she said. "They just didn't care." The fortress emerged from the mist like a black crown rising from the sea. My men called it the Iron Fang, a single tower of volcanic stone surrounded by walls thick enough to withstand cannon fire. No army had ever breached those walls. No assassin had ever made it past the second gate. But I wasn't taking her to the tower. I guided the horse toward the eastern cliffs, where a narrow path carved into the rock face led down to a cave mouth hidden by centuries of salt spray. The vault of the first king. The reason I'd built my fortress here in the first place. "The legend says your bloodline sealed something away," I said as we dismounted, my hand finding her elbow to steady her on the slick stone. "Something that could remake the hierarchy of every pack in existence. For 10,000 years, no one's been able to open it. Scholars have tried, the warriors have tried. 3 alphas died attempting to force the lock with raw power." Elara stared at the cave entrance. In the pale moonlight, I could see her face clearly for the first time. The sharp cheekbones of Blackwood nobility, the full lips pressed into a thin line, and those eyes, both dark brown now, with no trace of gold. "And if I can't open it either? Then I've paid 100 gold bars for a very expensive mystery." Inside, the cave opened into a chamber that had no business existing beneath natural stone. The walls were too smooth, too precisely carved. Symbols I'd spent decades trying to translate covered every surface. The Void Call script, a language that predated the first written pack histories. And at the center, the vault itself. It wasn't what most people imagined when they heard the word. No iron doors, no visible locks, just a pillar of black crystal, smooth as glass, rising from the floor to disappear into shadow above. The air around it hummed with a frequency I felt in my teeth, my bones, the deepest chambers of my heart. Elara approached it slowly, her bare feet leaving prints in the dust that had accumulated over millennia of waiting. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said, her voice small in the vast space. "They never trained me. They just locked me away, said I was dangerous, said my blood was cursed." "Your blood is the key." I stayed back, giving her space. "That's all I know. The manuscripts say the vault will recognize its keeper." She raised her hand. Her fingers trembled as they hovered an inch from the crystal surface. The scream that tore from her throat wasn't human. Light erupted from the pillar, gold and blinding white, and Elara flew backward, as if struck by an invisible fist. I moved without thinking, years of battle instinct overriding conscious thought, and caught her before her skull could crack against the stone floor. Blood poured from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. Her body convulsed in my arms, and for one terrible moment I felt the bond between Alpha and Territory flicker, felt my own power surge toward her as if trying to fill a wound I couldn't see. "Stay with me." I pressed my hand to her chest, feeling the erratic hammer of her heart. "Breathe. Just breathe." Her hand found my wrist, gripped with surprising strength. The convulsion stopped, the bleeding slowed, and when her eyes opened, both irises burned with solid gold. No pupil, no white, just molten metal staring up at me with an awareness that hadn't been there before. "It wasn't rejecting me," she whispered. "It was testing me, and I failed. But I know what I did wrong now. I know what it needs. I should have released her. Should have stepped back, maintained the distance proper between an alpha and his, what? His purchase? His prisoner? His key? Instead, I found myself brushing the blood from her cheek with my thumb, my voice rough with something I refused to name. "What does it need?" "Both of us." Her gold eyes searched my face. The vault wasn't sealed by one bloodline. It was sealed by two. An alpha and an omega of equal power, working in unison. That's why no one's been able to open it. They've been trying with only half the key. Before I could respond, her head turned sharply toward the cave entrance. "They're coming," she said, and the gold faded from her eyes, leaving exhaustion and a fear I understood too well. "My brothers. They put a tracker in my shackles. I felt it activate when we crossed into your territory. They're not here to take me back." "Then what?" "They're here to make sure no one else can use me." Her voice cracked. "They're here to kill us both." War has a sound that civilized men forget. It's not the clash of swords or the roar of battle cries. Those come later, when lines have been drawn and honor demands its bloody accounting. No, the true sound of war is silence. They held their breath before the storm. The moment when every creature in the forest goes still because death is walking through the trees. That silence wrapped around the Iron Fang as I carried Elara up the cliff path. "How many?" My second, a scarred wolf named Brennan, met us at the first gate. Scouts counted 30, full war party moving in standard Blackwood formation. 30 wolves against my garrison of 60 should have been acceptable odds. But the Blackwood pack hadn't survived for 3,000 years by fighting fair. Their strike teams were trained for infiltration, assassination, surgical removal of targets, not open warfare. "Get her to the library," I said, setting Elara on her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, but she caught herself against my arm with a determination that surprised me. "The inner vault. Seal the doors behind her. I'm not hiding while you fight my battle." Her voice was stronger now, that gold flickering at the edges of her irises. "The void call script in your library. I can read it. I started deciphering it during the ride here, the pieces I could see on your maps. If there's something in there that can help, there is." I gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet my eyes. The activation sequence for the fortress's old defenses. No one's been able to translate it in 5 generations. If you can read Void Call, then I'm more useful alive than protected. She pulled away from my grip. "Go. Kill my brothers if you can find them in the chaos. I'll give you weapons they've never seen." The first wave hit the outer wall before I reached the gatehouse. They came over the top rather than through ropes and climbing hooks, bodies moving with the fluid grace of wolves who'd been bred for exactly this kind of assault. I took the first, one in the throat before his feet touched stone, my claws extending mid-strike to open him from collar to hip. Blood misted the air, hot and copper-sweet. The second and third died together, their coordination faltering when they realized their target wasn't running. I moved through them like a scythe through wheat, every motion economical, precise. No wasted energy, no hesitation. Just the pure, cold efficiency of a predator who'd been killing since before their fathers were born. But for every body that fell, 2 more crested the wall. They were hurting me, I realized, keeping me engaged at the perimeter while smaller teams slipped past toward the interior, toward the library, toward her. I shifted. The library of the Iron Fang contained 12,000 texts, manuscripts I'd spent 3 decades collecting, trading for, stealing when necessary. Everything humanity and Wolfkind had ever recorded about the old powers, the first bloodlines, the secrets that the modern packs had, forgotten or deliberately buried. Elara moved through the stacks like a woman possessed, her fingers trailing along spines, pulling volumes seemingly at random. The Void Call script covered the walls here, too. I'd had the original stones transported from a ruin in the southern wastes, never knowing what they said, only that they hummed with dormant power. Now those symbols began to glow. Faint at first, barely visible in the candlelight, then brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat as she pressed her bloody palm against a panel I'd always assumed was decorative. "There," she breathed. "The defense sequence. It's not a weapon, it's a binding. The original builders could lock intruders in place, freeze them mid-motion." The shadows moved. Not metaphorically. Not the flicker of candles in a draft. The darkness itself peeled away from the corners of the room and began to coil around her feet like living smoke. I'd broken through the final ring of attackers and reached the library door just in time to see my own men, loyal wolves who'd fought beside me for decades, stumble backward with fear etched into their faces. They weren't looking at the Blackwood infiltrators who'd somehow breached the inner sanctum. They were looking at her. Elara stood at the center of a vortex of shadow and light, her hair floating in a wind that existed only around her body, her eyes solid gold and streaming tears that looked like molten metal. The Blackwood wolves had frozen mid-charge, their bodies locked in place by darkness that wound around their limbs like chains. "I can't." Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. "I can't control it." I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and did the one thing no alpha should ever do with an omega in the grip of uncontrolled power. I touched her. My hand closed around hers, my other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against my chest. And instead of trying to dominate the power, instead of attempting to force it down or cage it with my own, I opened myself to it. The bond that had flickered in the vault roared to life. I felt her terror become my calm, felt my control flow into her chaos. The shadows didn't disappear, but they steadied, responding to our combined will rather than her panic alone. "I've got you," I said against her ear. "We're the binary key, remember? 2 halves. Let me be your anchor." The frozen Blackwood wolves began to scream as the shadows tightened. "Don't kill them yet." My voice was steady despite the power crackling through both our bodies. "I have questions first." When it was over, when the survivors had been bound, and the dead had been counted, and the shadows had finally receded to their natural places, we stood in the wreckage of my library, surrounded by scattered pages and broken shelves. The Blackwood strike leader, the only one we'd left conscious, hung from shadow chains that Elara held with terrifying ease. "Tell your masters," I said, "that the Iron Alpha has claimed his Omega. Tell them the vault will open, and tell them, she's not your salvation." The wolf spat blood at my feet, his eyes wild with a fervor that looked almost religious. "The prophecy doesn't end with crowns and glory, Iron Alpha. It ends with fire and extinction. She's not your answer. She's your end." I nodded to Elara. She released him. He fled into the night, carrying my message to brothers who'd tried to murder their own sister. "What prophecy?" I asked when we were alone. Her gold eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like hope buried beneath the fear. "That's what's in the vault," she said. "The truth they've been hiding for 10,000 years, and tomorrow we're going to open it." Some doors are not meant to be opened. I'd heard that phrase countless times, from scholars who'd studied the vault, from elders who claimed to remember the old warnings, from my own father in the last lucid moments before the sickness took his mind. Some doors guard treasures, he'd told me, his hand cold and trembling in mine. But some doors are the treasure. They protect us from knowing what we truly are. I understood those words now, standing once again before the pillar of black crystal, with Elara at my side. The morning sun had barely crested the Iron Coast cliffs, painting the cave entrance in shades of blood and gold, fitting colors for what was about to happen. "Are you ready?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes traced the void call script spiraling up the pillar, the same symbols that had nearly killed her 12 hours ago. but something had changed in her face. The fear was still there, buried deep, but riding above it was a resolve I recognized. The look of someone who had stopped running. "My whole life," she said quietly, "they told me I was broken, defective, a mistake of bloodlines that should have been culled at birth. My brothers kept me alive only because killing vault blood carries a curse. They were too cowardly to risk it. But they made sure I knew every single day that my existence was a burden, a shame." Her hand found mine, her fingers interlaced with my own. "I'm done being their shame." Together we touched the crystal. The power that had thrown her across the chamber now flowed through both of us, a current that recognized its complete circuit for the first time in 10 millennia. I felt my wolf surge to the surface, not in aggression, but in recognition. And beside me, I felt Elara's omega nature rise to meet it, not submission, partnership. The pillar didn't shatter, it bloomed. Crystal petals unfolded like a flower made of frozen midnight, revealing what lay at its heart. Not a weapon, not treasure, not even a book. Light. Pure, concentrated, aware light that poured into the chamber and wrapped around us like a living thing. And within that light, knowledge. Images flooded my mind and Elara's too. Our thoughts so intertwined now that I couldn't tell where my understanding ended and hers began. I saw the first wolves, not the savage beasts of legend, but something older, wiser, beings who had chosen their forms, who had bound their souls to the earth and the hunt and each other. I saw them split into two lines, not Alpha and Omega as we knew the terms, but Sovereign and Keeper. Equal powers meant to rule in balance. I saw the schism, the first betrayal. Sovereigns who decided they were superior, who renamed themselves Alphas and reduced their keepers to Omegas, to servants, to property. I saw 10,000 years of history rewritten to serve the victors, and I saw the truth they'd buried deepest of all. "We're not two types of wolf," Elara breathed, her voice shaking with the weight of revelation. "We're two halves of the same creature. Neither is complete without the other. Neither meant to rule alone." The light pulsed once more, and I felt something change in my very blood. The title I'd carried my whole life, Iron Alpha, suddenly felt like a costume I'd been wearing. Underneath it, something older stirred. Something that had been sleeping in my bloodline for 400 generations, waiting for its other half to wake it. We were binary kings, the first true sovereigns to rise since the original betrayal, and we had an empire to reclaim. The Blackwood border was a day's ride from the Iron Coast. We made it in 6 hours, running in our wolf forms for the first time as equals rather than Alpha and Omega. Her speed matched mine. Her endurance pushed me to new limits. And when we shifted back at the edge of their territory, I saw the fear in the eyes of the scouts who'd spotted us. Word had already spread. The Blackwood pack assembled at their ancestral gathering ground. 300 wolves, from the ruling family to the lowest servants, drawn by a summons they couldn't refuse. Not magic. Something more primal. The call of sovereigns to subjects who had forgotten they'd ever served a higher power. Elara's brothers stood at the front, their faces masks of arrogant fury. "You have no authority here." The eldest, I didn't bother learning his name, stepped forward with his hand on his sword. "This territory belongs to Blackwood blood. Whatever tricks you've learned, whatever lies you've— Kneel." The word came from Elara, but it wasn't a request, wasn't even a command in the normal sense. It was reality asserting itself. The natural order of things, buried for 10,000 years, suddenly remembered. 300 wolves went to their knees, not because they chose to, because their blood recognized its rulers and their blood was older than their pride. Only her brothers remained standing, but barely. I could see them trembling, fighting against the compulsion with everything they had. The eldest's face had gone purple with the effort. "You sold your sister," I said, moving to stand beside Elara. "You tried to murder her, and you've spent centuries perpetuating a lie that stripped half your species of their birthright. The old ways were a perversion." I let my power flow outward, not as a weapon, but as a demonstration. "You claimed the title of Alpha. You don't deserve it." I reached out, not physically, but through the bond that connected all wolves to their hierarchy, and I took something from them. Not their lives. That would have been mercy. I took their wolves. The sound that emerged from them wasn't a scream. It was the cry of a creature feeling itself hollowed out, separated from the part of its soul that had defined it since birth. When it was done, 3 men stood where 3 alphas had been. Human. Powerless. Nothing. Elara stepped forward. Her eyes blazed gold, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every wolf present. "I am not your Omega. I am your keeper. I am the other half of the crown you've been taught to worship incompletely, and from this day forward, the old lie dies." She looked at her brothers, crawling in the dirt, unable even to meet her gaze. "You will live, you will remember, and you will know that the girl you called trash just ended your entire world." She turned away from them. The gathered wolves rose slowly, uncertainly, looking at us with expressions that mixed fear with something I hadn't expected. Relief. As if part of them had always known something was wrong, and we'd just named it. We didn't linger. The Blackwood territory would need new leadership. True leadership, the kind that recognized both halves of the ancient balance. But that work would take months, perhaps years. For now, we have made our statement. We were halfway back to the Iron Coast when Elara stopped walking. "Silas." I followed her gaze to the tree line at the edge of the road. A figure stood among the shadows. A woman, tall and angular, with hair as white as snow and eyes that glowed with an amber light I recognized immediately. In her hand. She held a sigil. A piece of metal that caught the fading sunlight and threw it back in patterns I'd seen only in the vault. The same sigil that had appeared on my skin when the power awakened. The same sigil that now marked the back of Elara's neck. The woman smiled, a slow, knowing expression that suggested secrets we hadn't even begun to uncover. "The binary kings have risen," she said, her voice carrying across the distance without effort. "The first step is complete, but the prophecy has 3 verses, little sovereigns." She raised the sigil higher, "And I am the keeper of the second." Before I could move, before I could demand answers, the shadows around her deepened, and she was gone. Vanished like smoke in a sudden wind. Elara's hand found mine again, her pulse racing against my palm. "Who was that?" I asked, though I suspected she knew as little as I did. "I don't know." Her gold eyes scanned the empty tree line. "But she wasn't a wolf, she was something older." The fawn wind rose around us, carrying with it the scent of change, of wars yet to come, of truths yet to unbury, of a prophecy that apparently had 2 more verses waiting to be fulfilled. I pulled Elara close, feeling the bond between us pulse with warmth and warning in equal measure. We'd opened the first door. We'd discovered the first truth. We'd begun to right a wrong 10,000 years in the making. But somewhere in the darkness, a keeper of secrets was watching, and she held the key to everything we didn't yet know. Stay for the next episode of Silverbound Tales. The binary kings have risen, but the prophecy isn't finished with them yet.